Préparez-vous à être le témoin d'une authentique démonstration de la confiance d'un chauffeur dans une nouvelle voiture.
Citroën is the French automobile
La Citroën
manufacturer.
GSA
The
qui
company
peut
was
atteindre
founded in
les
March
160 km/h.
1919 and was founded by André Citroën. And to this very day, the company is still alive and healthy. So, how to
Le chauffeur va faire éclater un
Let's
pneu
find out.
pendant qu'il fonce
Early
vers ces
years.
deux camions.
André Citroën built armaments for France during World War I. After the war, however, he realized that
Il poursuit sa trajectoire comme si rien ne s'était passé. Les nouvelles Citroën GSA haute performance, elles sont
Citroën was
uniques au
already
monde.
experienced in the automotive business. Thanks to a successful 6-year stint
Le test que vous allez voir a été réalisé en Angleterre sur une route spécialement construite à cet effet. Le but, prouver que grâce à l'hydropneumatique, une Citroën peut braquer et freiner même sur 3 roues.
As early as 1916, which is the year when Citroën asked the engineer
À 100 km/h, le pilote fait éclater un pneu avant. Cet exploit unique au monde démontre l'exceptionnelle sécurité de la Citroën GSA.
For which he could use his factory once he's returned. Long before that happened, however,
Citroën
he had modified
GSA,
his vision and
l'imagination sur la
decided,
route.
like Henry Ford, that the best post-war opportunities
Chargée au maximum, la Citroën GSA garde sa tenue. Chargée au maximum, d'autres s'inclinent. Citroën GSA, la voiture à l'étonnante suspension hydropneumatique. Voici le test de la chaise sur route pavée. À gauche, la Citroën GSA. À droite, une autre 7 chevaux. Qui va gagner? Citroën GSA, la voiture à l'étonnante suspension hydropneumatique. Sur 3 roues, la GSA roule. D'autres boîtes. Citroën GSA, la voiture à l'étonnante suspension hydropneumatique.
The result was Type A, announced to the press in March 1919, just 4 months after the guns fell silent. The first production Type A emerged from the factory at the end of May 1919, and in June it was exhibited at a showroom at number 42 on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, which normally sold Alda cars. Citroën persuaded the owner of Alda business, Fernand Charnand, to lend him the showroom, which is still in use today. This C42 showroom is where the company organizes expeditions and shows its vehicles and concept cars. A few years later, Charon would be persuaded to become a major investor in the Citroën business. On July 7, 1919, the first customer took delivery of a new Citroën 10HP Type A. That same year, André Citroën briefly negotiated with General Motors a proposed sale of the Citroën company. The deal nearby closed, but General Motors ultimately decided that its management and capital would be too overstretched by the takeover. Thus, Citroën remained independent until 1935. Between 1921 and 1937, Citroën produced half-track vehicles for off-road and military uses, using the Kagras track system. In the 1920s, the U.S. Army purchased several Citroën Kagras vehicles for evaluation, followed by a license to produce them. This resulted in the Army Ordnance Department building a prototype in 1939. In December 1942, it went into production with the M2 half-track car and M3 half-track versions. The US eventually produced more than 41,000 vehicles in over 70 versions between 1940 and 1944. After their 1940 occupation of France, the Nazis captured many of the Citroën half-track vehicles and armored them for their own use. Mr. Citroën was a keen marketer. He used the Eiffel Tower as the world's largest advertising sign, as recorded in Guinness World Records. He also sponsored expeditions in Asia, Croisée Jaune, North America, Croisée Blanche, and Africa Croisé Nord, demonstrating the potential for motor vehicles equipped with Cregris track system to cross inhospitable regions. These expeditions conveyed scientists and journalists, demonstrating extraordinary toughness. A 1923 Citroën that had already traveled 48,000 kilometers, 30,000 miles, was the first car to be driven around Australia. The car, a 1923 Citroën 5CV Type C torpedo, was driven by Neville Westwood from Perth, Western Australia, on a round trip from August to December 1925. This vehicle is now fully restored and in the collection of the National Museum of Australia. In 1924, Citroën began a business relationship with the American engineer Edward G. Budd. From 1899, Budd had worked to develop stainless steel bodies for railroad cars, for the Pullman in particular. Budd went to manufacture steel bodies for many automakers, Dodge being his first big auto client. At the Paris Motor Show in October 1924, Citroën introduced the Citroën B10, the first all-steel body in Europe. These automobiles were initially successful in the marketplace, but soon competitors, who were still using a wooden structure for their vehicles, introduced new body designs. Citroën, who did not redesign the bodies of his cars, still sold in large quantities nonetheless, the car's low price being the main selling point, which factor, however, caused Citroën to experience heavy losses. In 1927, the bank Lazard helped Citroën by bringing new much-needed funds, as well as by renegotiating its debt. For example, by buying out the Société de Vente des Automobiles Citroën, SOVAC, it went even further by entering its capital and being represented on the board. The three directors sent by Lazard were Raymond Philippi, André Mayer, and Paul Frentzen. André Citroën perceived the need to differentiate his product to avoid the low-price competition surrounding his conventional rear-drive models in the late 1920s and early 1930s. In 1933, he introduced the Roseisle, the first commercially available passenger car with a diesel engine developed with Harry Ricardo. Traction Avant and Michelin ownership. Traction Avant. The Traction Avant is a car that pioneered the mass production of three revolutionary features that are still in use today. A unitary body with no separate frame, four-wheel independent suspension, and front-wheel drive. Whereas many decades, the vast majority of motor cars were similar in conception to the Ford Model T, a body bolted onto a ladder frame which held all the mechanical elements of the car, a solid rear axle that originally connected the rear wheels and rear-wheel drive. The Model T school of automobile engineering proved popular because it was considered cheap to build, although it did pose dynamic defects, as automobiles were becoming more capable and resulted in heavier cars, which is why today cars are more like the Traction Avant than the Model T under the skin. In 1934, Citroën commissioned the American Budd Company to create a prototype which evolved into the 7 fiscal horsepower CV 32 HP 24 kilowatt Traction Avant, achieving quick development of the Traction Avant, tearing down and rebuilding the factory in 5 months. And the extensive marketing efforts were investments that resulted too costly for Citroën to do all at once, causing the financial ruin of the company. In December 1934, despite the assistance of the Michelin Company, Citroën filed for bankruptcy. Within the month, Michelin, already the car manufacturer's largest creditor, became its principal shareholder. However, the technologically advanced traction event had met with market acceptance, and the basic philosophy of cutting-edge technology used as a differentiator continued until the late 1990s. Pierre Michelin became the chairman of Citroën early in 1935. Pierre-Jules Boulanger, his deputy, became the vice president and chief of the engineering and design departments. In 1935, the founder André Citroën died from stomach cancer. Research breakthroughs. Pierre-Jules Boulanger had been a First World War air resonance photographer specialist with the French Air Force. He was capable and efficient and finished the war with the rank of captain. He was also courageous, having been decorated with the Military Cross and the Legion of Honor. He started working for Michelin in 1918, reporting directly to Edouard Michelin, co-director and founder of the business. Boulanger joined the Michelin board in 1922 and became president of Citroën in January 1938 after the death in a road accident of his friend Pierre Michelin, remaining this position until his own death in 1950. In 1938, he also had become Michelin's joint managing director. During the German occupation of France in World War II, Boulanger refused to meet Dr. Ferdinand Porsche or communicate with the German authorities except through intermediaries. He organized a go-slow on production of trucks with the Weschmarsch, many of which were sabotaged at the factory by putting the notch on the oil dipstick in the wrong place, which resulted in engine seizure. In 1944, when the Gestapo headquarters in Paris were sacked by the French residents, his name was prominent on a Nazi blacklist of the most important enemies of the Reich, to be arrested in the event of an Allied invasion of France. Citroën researchers, including Paul Mages, continued their work in secret against the express orders of the Germans, and developed the concepts that were later brought to a market in three remarkable vehicles: a small car, 2CV, a delivery van Type H, and a large Swift family car, DS. These were widely regarded by contemporary journalists as avant-garde, even radical solutions to automotive design. Thus began a decades-long period of unusual brand loyalty, normally seen in the automobile industry only in niche brands like Porsche and Ferrari. The 2CV. Citroën unveiled the Citroën 2CV, or Deux Chevaux, signifying 2 tax horsepower and initially only 9 HP, 6.7 kilowatts at the Paris station at the Paris Salon in 1948. The car became a bestseller, achieving the designer's aim of providing rural French people with a motorized alternative to the horse. It was unusually inexpensive to purchase and, with its small 2-cylinder engine, inexpensive to run as well. The 2CV pioneered a very soft interconnected suspension, but did not have the more complex self-leveling feature. This car remained in production with only minor changes until 1990 and was a common sight of French roads until recently. 9 million 2CV variants were produced in the period of 1948 to 1990. The DS. 1955 saw the introduction of the DS, the first full usage of Citroën's hydropneumatic self-leveling suspension system, tested on the rear suspension of the traction in 1954. The DS was also the first production car with modern disc brakes. A single high-pressure hydraulic system was used to accumulate the power steering, the suspension and brakes. The brakes were fully powered, not power-assisted, as pedal force was not a component of braking power. The gearshift semi-automatic transmission was also powered by the hydraulic system through a control valve with accumulating pistons in the gearbox, cover to shift the gears in the transmission, and the clutch was operated automatically by the system, so there was no clutch pedal. From 1957, the ID19 model offered a simplified hydraulic system with manual steering and conventional manual gear shift, and a significant price reduction. From 1968, with revised front-end style, the DS introduced auxiliary driving lights that moved directionally with the steering, improving visibility at night. Production from 1956 to 1975 totaled almost 1.5 million cars. The streamlined car was remarkable for its era and had a remarkable sounding name in French.
En achetant une Citroën classée verte avec les écolos repris Citroën, jusqu'à 3 000 € offerts parmi un choix de plus de 90 modèles.
The same as Dios, which means goddess. It placed third in 1999 Car of the Century competition. High-pressure hydraulics. This high-pressure hydraulic system would form the basis of over 9 million Citroën cars, including the DS, SM, GS, CX, BX, XM, Xtania, C5, and C6. Self-leveling suspension is the principal user benefit. The car maintains a constant ride height above the road, regardless of passenger and cargo load, and despite the very soft suspension. Hydropneumatic suspension is uniquely able to absorb road irregularities without disturbing the occupants, and is often compared to riding on a magic carpet for this reason. These vehicles shared the distinguishing feature of rising to operating ride height when the engine was turned on, like a mechanical camel, per Car and Driver magazine. A lever, later replaced by an electronic switch beside the driver's seat, allowed the driver to adjust the height of the car. This height adjustability allows for the clearing of obstacles, bordering shallow, slow-moving streams, and changing tires. Since Citroën was unfunded, its vehicles had the tendency to be underdeveloped at launch, with limited distribution and service networks outside France. Consequently, the early DS models experienced teething issues with the complex hydraulic system. Eventually, the hydraulic seals and system component design were sorted, becoming reliable. Licensing such a technological leap forward was pursued to a limited extent. In 1965, the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow used this type of suspension, while the 1963 Mercedes-Benz 600 and Mercedes-Benz 300 SEL 6.3 tried to replicate its advantages with a costly, complex, and expensive to maintain air suspension that avoided the Citroën patented technology. By 1975, the Mercedes-Benz 450 SEL 6.9 was finally produced with this proven system, and Mercedes-Benz continues to offer variations on this technology today. During Citroën's 1968 to 1975 venture with Mercedes, the Citroën high-pressure hydraulic system was used on several Mercedes models. For power clutch operation, Bora, power pedal adjustment, Bora, pop-up headlights, Bora-Merrick, brakes, Bora-Merrick Cosm, steering Cosm, and the entire Quattroporte 2 prototype, which was a 4-door Citroën SM under the skin. Aerodynamic pioneer. Citroën was one of the early pioneers of the now widespread trend of aerodynamic automobile design, which helps to reduce fuel consumption and to improve high-speed performance by reducing wind resistance. The DS could happily cruise at 160 kilometers per hour, 100 miles per hour without any discomfort for the occupants. The firm began using a wide tunnel in the 1950s, helping them to curate highly streamlined cars, such as the DS. There were that were years ahead of their competitors, and so good were the aerodynamics of the CX model that it took its name CX from the mathematical term used to measure the drag coefficient. Expansion and financial challenges. In the 1960s, Citroën undertook a series of financial and development decisions aiming to build on its strength of the 1950s with the successful 2CV, Type H, and DS models. Citroën went bankrupt in 1974, so the effectiveness of these maneuvers is rather doubtful. These maneuvers were to address two key gaps facing the company. The first one was the lack of a mid-sized car between its own range of very small, cheap passenger vehicles, 2CV and AMI, and the large, expensive models DS and ID. In today's terms, this would be similar to a brand consisting only of the Tata Nonno and Jaguar XJ. Because of its potential volume, the mid-size segment was the most profitable part of the car market, and in 1965, the Citroën's Q Renault 16 stepped to fill it. The second major issue was the lack of a powerful engine suitable for export markets. The post-World War II tax horsepower system in France was steeply progressive, and vehicles over 2.0 liter, 2.8 liters displacement faced a heavy annual tax, with the result that the cars made in France were considered underpowered outside of the country. For both the 1955 DS and the 1974 CX models, development of the original engine around which the design was planned proved too expensive for the available finances, so the actual engine used in both cases was a modest and outdated four-cylinder design. These steps include 1963 open negotiations with Peugeot to cooperate in the purchase of raw materials and equipment, but talks broke off in 1965. 1964 partnered with NSU Modern Work to develop the Wankel engine via the Combol, later Commodore subsidiary. For Citroën, this represented the chance for a technological run around the French tax horsepower system by producing a more powerful but still small power plant. The first production car developed a 106 HP from a 1-liter engine, while the standard GS delivered 55 HP with a 1-liter engine. 1965 took over the French maker Panhard in the hope of using its expertise in mid-sized cars. Cooperation between the two companies had begun 12 years earlier, and they had agreed to a partial merger of their sales networks in 1953. Panhard ceased manufacturing in 1967. 1965 purchased the truck manufacturer Berlette. 1968 purchased the Italian sports car maker Mercedes again, with an eye to producing a more powerful car, keeping a small engine in line with the French tax horsepower system. The first production vehicle developed a 170 HP with a 2.7-liter engine. This was the 1970 SM, which featured a V6 Mercedes power plant, hydropneumatic suspension, and a fully powered self-centering steering system called Devari. The SM was engineered as if we're replacing the DS family car with a leveling investment that the small luxury grand touring car sector alone would never be able to support, even in the best circumstances. 1968 restructured worldwide operations under a new holding company, Citroën SA. Michelin, Citroën's longtime controlling shareholders, sold a 49% stake to Fiat in what was referred to as the Par-Devi Agreement Participation et Développement Industries. The teams Charles Marchetti and Citroën began working together on the development of the Re-2 helicopter. From a model range perspective, the 1970s started well, supported by the successful launch of the long-awaited mid-size Citroën GS, finally filling the huge gap between the 2CV and the DS with a 1-liter hydropneumatic suspended car. The GS went on to sell 2.5 million units. 601,918 cars were produced in 1972 alone, up from the 526,443 of 1971, enough to lift the company past Peugeot into second place among French automakers when ranked by sales volume. The older models continued to sell well. The peak production period of the DS was 1970 and 2CV was in 1974. As the 1970s progressed, circumstances became more unfavorable. In 1973, Fiat sold back to Michelin its 49% stake in the Par-Devi holding company that owned Citroën. The Citroën and Fiat joint announcement indicated that the benefits foreseen for their union in 1968 had failed to materialize. This was not in line with the tire company's long-term strategy of ending involvement in the car manufacturing business and created a very unstable ownership situation. This was not in line with the tire company's long-term strategy of ending involvement in the car manufacturing business and created a very unstable ownership situation. The company suffered another financial blow with the 1973 energy crisis. The gamble on Commodore and Mercedes showed that there was a serious flaw in the plan, particularly for companies producing engines with high fuel consumption. In 1974, the car maker withdrew from North America due to U.S. design regulations that outlawed core features of Citroën cars. Huge losses at Citroën were caused by the failure of the Commodore rotary engines. Venture added to the strategic management error of going the 15 years from 1955 to 1970 without a model in the profitable middle range of the European market, plus the massive development cost of a string of new models: the GS, Varisority, CX, SM, Mercedes Bora, Mercedes Maroc, Mercedes Quattroporte 2, and Mercedes Cosm. Each of these models is a technological marvel in its own right. Thus, 40 years later, after the bankruptcy related to the Traction Avant, Citroën went bankrupt again, losing its existence as an independent entity, selling Berlet and Mercedes and closing Commodore. The PSA Peugeot Citroën era. Fearing large job losses due to the poor cash flow situation and the unstable ownership structure, the French government arranged talks between Citroën and Michelin, culminating in the merger of Automobiles Citroën and Automobiles Peugeot into a single company. Thus, 1 year after the break with Fiat, on June 24, 1974, Citroën announced the new partnership, this time with Peugeot, to whom Michelin agreed to transfer control of the business. In December 1974, Peugeot SA acquired a 38.2% share of Citroën, and on April 9, 1976, they increased their stake of the then bankrupt company to 89.95%, thus creating the PSA group, where PSA is short for Peugeot Société Anonyme, becoming PSA Peugeot Citroën. In May 1975, Mercedes was sold to Di Tommaso, and the new Italian owner was thereby able to exploit the sales potential of the models and technology developed by Citroën, as well as to utilize the image of the Mercedes brand in a download brand extension to sell 40,000 of the newly designed B-Turbo models. The truck manufacturing company Berlet was sold to Renault. This new PSA venture was a financial success from 1976 to 1979. Citroën had two successful new designs in the market, the GS and the CX. In the wake of the oil crisis, the brand also resurgent sales for the 2CV and the Daon, and soon the Peugeot 104-based Citroën Visa and Citroën LNA. Peugeot was typically prudent with its own finances. Then PSA purchased the aging assets and substantial liabilities of Chrysler Europe for $1, leading to losses from 1980 to 1985. PSA resecuted the Talbot name for the Chrysler cars, but stopped producing cars with the badge in 1987 as the cars were considered unreliable and poorly made. Conflict with the trade unions. In the early 1980s, Citroën was targeted by union action. On May 25, 1982, events led to a mass demonstration in the streets of Paris when approximately 27,000 workers affirmed their wish to work at a company which was being picketed by striking workers who had been blocking access to the factories for 4 weeks. The demonstration was successful, and 6 days later, work at the plants resumed. Jacques Lombard, one of the company's senior managers, had gone public with his concerns criticizing the strikes. Changing design language. PSA gradually diluted Citroën's ambitious, highly individualistic, and distinctive approach to engineering and styling. All through the 1980s, Citroën models became increasingly Peugeot-like. The 1982 BX used the hydropneumatic suspension system and had a typical Citroën CQ appearance whilst being powered by Peugeot-derived engines and using the floor pan later seen in the Peugeot 405. In this respect, PSA followed the worldwide motor industry trend of platform sharing, which is a logical way to reduce costs whilst selling apparently different models. By the late 1980s, many of the distinctive features of the brand had been removed or alerted. Peugeot's conventional switchgear replacing Citroën's quirky but ergonomic lunal designs, complete with canceling indicators that Citroën had refused to adopt in ergonomic grounds. The cars were more banal, conventional, but also able to break into new markets, like fleet vehicles in the UK. Geographic expansion. In the meantime, Citroën expanded into many new global markets. Beyond existing manufacturing plants in Argentina, Chile, Vietnam, and Yugoslavia, it added Iran, Greece, Romania, and China. In the late 1970s, the firm developed a small car for production in Romania known as the Olestin, which it sold in Western Europe as the Citroën Axle. That joint venture has now ended, but a new one between PSA and Toyota is now producing cars like the Citroën C1 in the Czech Republic. The China joint venture began selling cars in 1984 and building them in 1994. The current range of family cars there includes the C3 and Xsara and locally designed cars in the Fukang and Elise models. The brand recently increased its Chinese sales by 30% in an overall market growth of 11%, and ranks highest in the 2014 Customer Satisfaction Survey by G-Day Power in China. Citroën is a global brand, exception in North America, where the company has not returned since the SM was effectively banned in 1974 for not meeting U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration NHTSA bumper height regulations. In 2016, Peugeot Citroën South Africa PCSA announced that they were going to stop importing new Citroën models into South Africa in order to focus on increasing Peugeot sales in the country. In May 2019, it was reported that the PSA would reintroduce the Citroën brand into South Africa. This was later confirmed by PCSA in August 2019 that new Citroën models will go on sale in the middle of October 2019. The recent decade. From 2003 to 2010, Citroën produced the C3 Perle, an unusual convertible with allusions to the 1948-1990 2CV model, both in body styles such as the bonnet and in its all-round particularity. In 2001, it celebrated its history of innovation when it opened a museum of its many significant vehicles, the Conservatory with 300 cars. In line with the severe decline in European car sales after 2009, worldwide sales of vehicles declined from 1,460,373 in 2010 to 1,435,688 in 2011, and with 961,156 of these sold in Europe. In 2011, the PSA Group was close to forming a partnership with BMW for the development of electric and hybrid vehicles. But the talks fell through. Shortly after Groupe PSA, Citroën's parent company, had announced a partnership with GM, which later also failed. Dongfeng Peugeot Citroën continues growing and has developed 8 new car designs exclusively for the China market. Currently in China, Citroën and Peugeot face the same challenge as Volkswagen. There are too many sedans and hatchbacks, but not enough models in the strong-selling SUV and minivan MPV categories. The brand ranked highest in 2014 Customer Satisfaction Survey by G-Day Power in China, above luxury brands like Mercedes-Benz and BMW, and above mass-market brands like Volkswagen, ranking only 13th and 17th respectively. In the first 10 months of 2014 in China, the sales of Dongfeng Citroën cars increased by 30% in an overall market growth of 11%. Despite the near-death financial experience of PSA Peugeot Citroën in 2014 and financial rescue by Dongfeng Motors, the Citroën and DS brands were developing new technologies and are both hoping to grow 15% by 2020, according to Citroën CEO Linda Jackson and DS CEO Yves Bonfont. In January 2020, Linda Jackson was succeeded as CEO of Citroën by the Deputy CEO Vincent Kobe, and she would instead lead a study to clarify and support brand differentiation within a brand portfolio. Citroën will enter the Indian market in early 2021 with the launch of the C5 Aircross SUV. Citroën cars will be manufactured at Citroën's through Valyar plant in Tamil Nadu, India. The DS brand. In early 2009, Citroën announced the development of the premium brand DS for different spirit or distinctive series, although the references to the historical Citroën DS is evident, to run in parallel to its mainstream cars. The slogan of the DS car marque is Spirit of Avant-Grande. This new series of cars started early in 2010 with the DS3, a small car based on the floor pan of the new C3. The DS3 is based on the concept that preceded the C3 Pearl production model and the DS Inside concept car. The DS3 is customizable with various roof colors, concentrating with the body panels. It was named 2010 Car of the Year by Top Gear magazine and was awarded Best Super Mini 4 times in a row by the JD Power Satisfaction Survey UK, and second most efficient Super Mini Citroën DS3 1.6 EHDI 115 Airdream True MPG 63.0 MPG by what car? Behind the C3. In 2013, the DS3 was again the best-selling premium subcompact car with 40% of the European market share, validating the business model of this product development. The DS series is deeply connected to Citroën, as the DS4 launched in 2010 is based on the 2008 Citroën Hypnos concept car and the DS5, which followed in 2015, being based on the 2005 C Sport Lounge concept car. The rear badge is a new DS logo rather than the familiar Citroën double chevron, and all will have markedly different styling from their equivalent sister cars. Citroën has produced several dramatic-looking concept sports cars of late, with a fully working Citroën Servolt being badged as a DS. Indeed, the 2014 DS Divine concept car develops the Citroën Servolt prototype as the future sport coupe of the DS range. In China, Citroën has standalone DS showrooms as well as entire plants built specifically for the production of these vehicles. Since 2014, Citroën has sold the Chinese-built DS5LS and DS6WR in China. And there's a history of Citroën. How did it become so popular? Well, if you look at it this way, the company has basically expanded their company into multiple countries, and they continue to expand it as they went along. And when they expanded their company into multiple other countries, that's when it became more popular, and that's how it basically became what it is now. But anyways, this is where I'm going to end off today's video. If you guys haven't enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit that like button, and also don't forget to subscribe because I do videos every single day. And also, don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss a single video I upload. And also, don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell on my second channel. My second channel will be in the third link in the description below. And if you guys would like to send me fan art, you guys can send me fan art on my Instagram. My Instagram will be the second link in the description below. And if you guys would like to join my Roblox fan group, my Roblox fan group will be the first link in the description below. And if you guys would like to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter will be the fourth link in the description below. And if you guys would like to follow me on Reddit, my Reddit will be the fifth link in the description below. And if you guys would like to follow me on TikTok, my TikTok will be the sixth link in the description. And if you guys would like to check out my Facebook page will be the seventh link in the description below. And until then, I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!